Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Tensions between Israel and Iran reached a boiling point on Friday when the Israeli military carried out more than 200 strikes against Iran, and Iran responded with more than 100 missiles launched at Israel. The Israeli strikes left a number of senior Iranian commanders dead, including Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Chief Hossein Salami, as well as several nuclear scientists. Nuclear facilities, such as the one in Natanz, were among the structures damaged in the Israeli attack. Later on Friday, Iran responded with a ballistic missile barrage of its own, damaging parts of Tel Aviv, according to initial assessments. In this episode, we hear from a number of Al Monitor journalists, both in the Middle East and in Washington, on what the recent Israel-Iran escalation means for the region. They offer insights into changes in Israeli and U.S. strategy towards countering Iran, how Iran may alter its calculus on nuclear weapons, and how other governments view the situation, plus the economic impact of the conflict. Hope you enjoy. The Iranian strikes on Friday upped the ante from the previous attacks Iran launched against Israel in 2024. Here's the head of Al Monitor's Israel Pulse, Rina Bassist, on what the latest Iranian strikes revealed to Israel.
I think that Israelis understand that what happened tonight is probably just the beginning. We know that Iran is capable of launching hundreds of ballistic missiles in a very short space of time. We know that they do not shy from targeting civilian areas. We know that they don't shy away from targeting Jerusalem or the West Bank, where Palestinians also reside. And even if these ballistic missiles carry what we call just regular heads and not nuclear ones, clearly they can cause quite a lot of damage. The Israeli anti-missile protection is excellent, but it's not hermetic. And while Israelis are extremely resilient, especially after the last 20 months, I would say, they are also very tired. And you can imagine what young children are experiencing with the sirens going on and staying for long minutes, long hours, perhaps in the shelters. These are definitely very difficult times for the Israeli society.
The success of the Israeli strikes on Iran and against Iranian proxies since the start of the Gaza war in 2023 has left many wondering what options the Islamic Republic has left. Here's Al Monitor's senior news editor, Joyce Karam, on how the recent escalation might affect Iran's calculus on the nuclear issue, as well as the talks with the U.S.
So when we consider the question of what's next, we should keep in mind that this is the largest attack on Iran since the Iran-Iraq war. It's definitely the largest that Israel has carried out inside Iran, and the strikes are not even over yet. So when it comes to the Iranian calculus, what we are likely to see next is both direct and indirect Iranian retaliation through the IRGC, through the military establishment, and through the regional proxies. We've seen that play out in the past. When it comes to the nuclear talks, we're due for a sixth round on Sunday. It's really hard to see anything coming out of that now. There are even calls within Iran to change the nuclear doctrine and proceed by building a nuclear weapon. We'll have to also assess what's the damage, what's going to be the impact on the nuclear facilities. But what's for sure is we are now in a prolonged war conflict between Iran and Israel that could take weeks, if not months, before the dust settles.
On the topic of Iran's proxies, the Israeli military reported a launch from Yemen's Houthis on Friday, evening local time, before the Iranian counterattack. The Lebanese organization Hezbollah, however, has been relatively quiet since this all began. Here's Beatrice Farhat in Beirut on what Hezbollah has said in response to the Israeli attack on Iran and why.
So far, Lebanon's Hezbollah has refrained from retaliating in support of Iran by launching its own attack against Israel. There has been several reports claiming that the new authorities in Lebanon urged the group not to drag the country into an unwanted war. An official from Hezbollah earlier told Reuters that the group will not initiate an attack in response to the Israeli strikes on its ally, Iran. Hezbollah later issued a statement condemning the strikes and saying they crossed all red lines. The group's leader, Naim Qassem, also said the attack will not go unanswered, although he did not specify whether Hezbollah will be the one to retaliate. Hezbollah is one of Iran's main proxies in the region and fought a devastating war with Israel between October 2023 and November 2024. A source told Al Arabiya channel earlier Friday that the Lebanese government reportedly informed Hezbollah that anyone who would drag the country into a war will bear the responsibility of their actions. Another government source also revealed to the local French-speaking paper, L'Orient Le Jour, that the Lebanese army also reached out to the group, urging it to exercise restraint and avoid involving Lebanon into the escalating conflict between Iran and Israel.
The Gulf states condemned Israel's attack on Iran and expressed their concern about the situation. Though Saudi Arabia in particular has said they have issues with Iran's nuclear program in the past, the kingdom resumed relations with the Islamic Republic in 2023, opting to have cordial ties instead of confrontation. Another important country in all this is Turkey, which has a complex relationship with both Iran and Israel. Israel-Turkey relations have taken a massive hit since the start of the Gaza war, but Ankara's ties to Tehran are a bit less straightforward. Here's Ezgi Akin in Ankara on how Turkey is looking at the Israeli strikes on Iran.
Ankara has long had a complicated relationship with Tehran, clashing over several foreign policy issues. Turkey also sees a nuclear-armed Iran as a direct threat to its national security and has been supporting negotiations between the Trump administration and Tehran. Still, Ankara views Israel's latest strike as a dangerous provocation, fearing that this would spark a broader conflict. The strikes prompted a high-level security summit in Ankara today, where Turkey's foreign policy, defense and intelligence chiefs, as well as army commanders, discussed the potential ramifications of the escalation. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan earlier today condemned the attack, accusing the Jewish state of deliberately fueling tensions. The escalation comes at a time when Turkish-Israeli ties have sharply worsened over the past 2 years, first over the Gaza war and more recently over Israeli strikes in Syria, where Ankara-backed groups have taken power. Meanwhile, despite public condemnation of Israel, Ankara is also quietly working to de-escalate a potential retaliation by Iran. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan today held talks with his Iraqi and Jordanian counterparts, hoping to prevent things from spiraling further.
Outside of the region, the U.S. response is of course a major factor in how the latest round of Israel-Iran conflict will play out. On the defense front, Al Monitor confirmed that the U.S. military helped Israel shoot down the Iranian missiles on Friday. Here's Jared Szuba from the Pentagon on how the Israeli strikes have changed the game when it comes to how to counter Iran.
But I think it's worth focusing on how Israel has sort of rewritten the playbook that has long been in the works between the U.S. and Israel on plans to attack Iran and its nuclear facility. I think the traditional wisdom on how this could go down has been totally overturned. Traditionally it was supposed to be, ideally a combined joint U.S.-Israeli operation, starting with waves of Tomahawk and cruise missiles to knock out the Iranian and IRGC command and control, ballistic missile sites, communications, followed by fighter escorts and heavy bombers delivering 30,000-pound bombs to knock out and disrupt uranium production at Iran's fortified subterranean nuclear facilities. The Israelis, what we saw last night completely overturned that model. The Israelis have been planning for this, preparing for this for about 15 years. At many times in close coordination with the Americans, but Pentagon strategists have long been concerned that the only way to do it effectively through long-range ground-penetrating strikes really could only be effectively executed by the U.S. military for logistical and hardware reasons. U.S. officials have they've also long been worried, that attacking Iran's nuclear program and should it fail to completely annihilate the enrichment capability, it could very likely set off an Iranian race to obtain a bomb. But clearly the Obama administration's rejection of Netanyahu's brinksmanship over a decade ago over this issue has led the Israeli military and Mossad to innovate with more covert and creative methods to achieve its objectives. In that sense, yesterday's attack was both less and more than what a number of observers and experts had anticipated. Israeli military assessments have since said that uranium stockpiles and centrifuges have been destroyed, but it is far from clear how badly they have set back the Iranian government's capabilities in terms of uranium production. While the Natanz site was hit, it's also not clear the extent to which there was damage at Fordow. And I think concerningly, Israel's National Security Minister, Ezgi Akin, publicly admitted today that military strikes cannot fully destroy Iran's enrichment capabilities, and that an offensive is really just a necessary step to pressure the Iranian leadership into capitulating to U.S. demands to end its nuclear enrichment program through diplomacy. So it certainly looks as if Israel's mass assassination of IRGC and Iranian armed forces top echelons, which, by the way, the Iranian foreign minister called a quote, declaration of war. But it certainly looks as if that touch in the operation was designed as an intimidation tactic to compensate for the shortcomings of the strikes on the nuclear sites, which were, otherwise impressive, but like I said, not quite clear how effective they have been or they will be. And I think the ultimate question is now, is if the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei will see this as a do-or-die moment in which his regime must obtain a nuclear weapon in order to survive, or will the evidence that has now been borne out of Israel's extraordinary intelligence penetration of the Iranian military high command and the IRGC command, will that spook Khamenei into realizing or concluding that his enemies are likely to discover the effort to build a nuclear weapon before it is completed, thus inviting a larger attack by the Israelis and likely the Americans, potentially resulting in either his death or the deaths of further members of his government.
On the political front, U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio both commented on Israel's initial attack, but their messaging wasn't exactly the same. Here's Rosaline Carroll in Washington on what we know about the Trump administration's view of what has happened.
President Trump made clear that he was informed in advance about Israel's planned attacks, and in a post on Truth Social, he framed the strikes as the inevitable result of repeated warnings he issued to Iran, saying he gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal, and that Iranian hardliners, quote, didn't know what was about to happen, but are, quote, all dead now. Most recently, he told Axios that the strikes could actually help get a nuclear deal with Iran. So Trump, in effect, seems to be signaling that this is or was part of the plan. Then you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio's statement on Thursday, which emphasized that Israel acted unilaterally and said the U.S. is not involved in the strikes. While this doesn't explicitly contradict what Trump is saying, this is certainly a different tone. While this is messaging, we are trying to read between the lines here. The lines put out between Trump and Rubio seem to indicate some daylight between them. And then you have Trump also emphasizing that diplomacy is still on the table, like he told Axios and said again earlier in a Fox News interview. So we'll have to see what steps the U.S. takes next. Trump is making it clear that he still wants a deal, but the question is whether that remains possible.
The economic impact of the tit-for-tat strikes is already being felt around the world. The price of Brent crude oil, considered the global benchmark for global oil prices, was up more than 7% to above $74 a barrel as of Friday afternoon, East Coast time in the U.S. Various airlines have canceled flights to the region, and both Tel Aviv and Tehran's airports remain closed. Israel's own energy interests are being affected as well. Here's Chief Business Correspondent Jack Dudden on the state of Israel's gas sector and how any disruptions could impact Egypt as well.
We also saw Israel's energy ministry say on Friday that Leviathan, which is the biggest gas field in Israel, has been suspended for gas production, cutting supply to Egypt, which is a major importer of Israeli gas. It comes at a particularly hard time for Egypt because it's getting hotter in the summer and there's higher energy demand, and it doesn't produce enough gas to meet all of its demand. I think daily production was down from about 4.6 billion cubic feet a day to around 4.5 billion cubic feet. But consumption was roughly 6 billion cubic feet. So the rest of that shortfall is usually imported gas, be that LNG from different countries, including Israel. While it hasn't had a direct impact yet on Egypt, a prolonged shutdown of Israeli gas fields would leave Egypt with a significantly big supply gap to fill.
The escalation could affect the Middle East's economic outlook for the rest of the year. Here's senior market research analyst Sam Wendell on what to look for.
When it comes to how Israeli strikes on Iran might affect the Middle East economic outlook for the rest of 2025, it's still a bit early to draw firm conclusions. But if the situation continues to escalate, the economic fallout could be significant. We're already seeing some short-term impacts in oil and financial markets, but the major risk, of course, is if this conflict spreads to hit Gulf oil or energy infrastructure. That would have immediate ripple effects through the global economy. That said, the region has already been grappling with this conflict for some time, and we can look to last year for some perspective. In 2024, the Middle East saw slower economic growth, partly due to instability. The IMF recently noted that regional growth last year came in at 1.8%. That represented a 0.2 percentage point downgrade from earlier forecasts, which the lender attributed in part due to conflict-related impacts. So looking ahead, the IMF had projected growth to rebound in 2025 in the region, helped by stabilization in regional conflict alongside rising oil output. But with Israel striking Iran now in June, these projections may well be revised downwards if this persists. So for now, we're in wait-and-see mode. But for some context, Wall Street's so-called fear gauge has ticked up today, but the rise is still fairly modest compared to the spike we saw back in April during the height of Trump's trade war rhetoric. Regardless, this escalation adds another layer of uncertainty to an already volatile global economic picture.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.